Hello and welcome to our presentation, which is based around an ongoing scholarship project. My name is Roya Ali Malayeri and I am an EAP teaching fellow at the University of Leeds. Along with another three contributors of this project, Barbara Himmelrich, Dr. Olena Gandarina and Dr. Milena Marenkova, we will talk about conline teaching, creative pedagogy as a conduit to EAP practitioners agency. So I will first provide you with a definition of conline, which is probably a term that you haven't heard before. We will then go through a brief literature review and the context of our project and the rationale behind our project. These will be followed by our project's research questions and the research methods that we have used. We will then go through three main themes that emerged from our pilot study database. And I will bring all this to an end with a conclusion. So conline is a term that we came up with and we thought it represents the focus of our project, which is teaching online during the COVID pandemic. So we thought C can stand for both COVID pandemic and creativity, and online for online teaching.
Before we discuss our project in more detail, I'd like to briefly mention what the literature says about the themes that we're interested in. First of all, why creativity? According to Mali and Kiss, research that looks at creativity with its multiple connections to those who enact it, the context in which it's performed, whether that's sociocultural, linguistic, educational, and so on, and the processes which help it flourish, may provide us with better overall understanding that can be translated into practical classroom pedagogy. When it comes to second language acquisition, creative approaches to the delivery of language classes in EFL, ESL, and ELL contexts have been widely adopted and promoted. In the literature on language teaching, creativity is seen not simply as optional, an optional add-on to what we do, but as its very essence. Creativity in language teaching is seen as a floating signifier, conditioned by socio-historical and disciplinary contexts, delineated further into creative language and creative language teaching domains. When it comes to EAP, scholarship on how creativity is understood and deployed is fragmented. Studies exploring the use of specific techniques such as gaming, creative arts, or object handling for development of individual competencies. The focus largely remains text-oriented and delimited by the pragmatic nature of EAP. Techniques that have been deployed in order to develop linguistic confidence and intercultural competence include the use of multimodal text and genres, object handling and Lego builds, improvisation and drama, and also using students' existing plurilingual repertoires. The focus here is generally on students' creativity. However, EAP practitioners' creativity remains underexplored, sporadic, and fragmented. Within our research, we're especially interested in the links between creativity and EAP practitioners' agency, and whether or how creativity can help further this agency. Hyland believes that those who design and deliver EAP courses, aka EAP practitioners, are typically not in a position to influence the bigger institutional picture, so they would have limited agency. Hanks describes EAP practitioners' agency as practitioners are recognized, and they recognize themselves, as valuable and powerful actors, contributing to theory-building discourses across fields. We believe that creativity in AUB during the pandemic online teaching is particularly interesting given socio-political issues facing EAP during COVID-19. Which are embedded in the paradigmatic turn of seeing language teaching as socially constructed and agentive. We see creativity in EAP as unfixed, floating, and dependent on context and EAP practitioner stance, views, and background, which are closely linked with an EAP practitioner's agency and identity. We also identify a gap in the literature regarding the link between student and practitioner's agency and creativity, and we hope that our project can be useful in closing this gap, at least slightly.
The main research question in our study is how do EAP practitioners express and facilitate their creative voices in the context of the pandemic. We use this concept of the creative voice in order to emphasize context-dependent, dynamic and floating nature of EAP practitioners' creativity, which is closely linked with their professional identity and agency. For our conceptual or theoretical framework, we're using three main approaches. So, a socio-ecological model of teacher's agency developed by Biesta and colleagues, creative inquiry approach, and Bakhtinian polyphony. So, the first two informed our methodology, questionnaires, and interview guides. Our study uses a multi-method arts-informed research approach with two types of data collection methods, questionnaires and semi-structured interviews. The reason why we chose a multi-method approach is in order to allow for more comprehensive and complete understanding of the phenomena. This will help to answer the research question in a deeper and a more substantial way, connecting emic and ethic perspectives. We use the arts in order to advance knowledge through research rather than trying to produce fine arts works. In terms of the data analysis, we included both inductive and deductive aspects. First, we developed the code book, and we followed guidance from Roberts and colleagues 2019. Then the three coders analyzed the data thematically using axial coding and developed new codes and themes as they emerged. In today's presentation, we will focus on the pilot study of the third phase, qualitative arts-informed. Data sample for the third phase comprised one semi-structured interview using 3 paintings and 2 creative arts-informed techniques. The interview was conducted online using Microsoft Teams and lasted for 45 minutes and 26 seconds. Going back to our second conceptual framework, creative inquiry approach, the aim is to decenter the language encompassing pupils' complex communicative, affective, experiential, and political realities, trying to explore what was previously unknown, unheard, or undervalued. So, our research used 4 types of creative inquiry techniques overall. You can see to the left, this image is our metaphor-based technique, which was produced by our artist Roya, and the metaphors were adapted from Away 2013. This was used in our questionnaire. We also used 3 paintings, Creative Grid, as was previously mentioned, and Creativity Landscape, which was adapted from the language portrait technique.
Now I'm going to talk about the preliminary findings of our qualitative data analysis based on the pilot dataset. A major theme that emerged from this dataset is that of the importance of collaboration for creative practice, with a number of key traits associated with it. In the first place, collaboration as a concept was seen by our participant as a type of Bakhtinian polyphony, a multiplicity of voices and viewpoints that emerge in the process of teaching and that are constantly in the state of productive tension. Thus, when asked to deploy the first art technique in our study, giving them the opportunity to represent their understanding of creativity, as you can see in the quote on the left-hand side of this slide, our pilot participant found the Rubik's Cube image on the right-hand side of the slide somewhat lacking, as the human figure seemed to prioritize one vantage point over many, individual over collective knowledge formation. As can be seen in the participants' visual output on the right-hand side, elements of polyphony are present in a number of ways, from explicit references to the collective nature of creativity, such as the words team and collaboration, through direct question-seeking dialogue, what do you think?, to somewhat suggestive, slogan-like statements, tea for all. A key participant in this collaborative process are the students. And as you can see in the quote on this slide, the conceptualization of collaboration is polyvocal dialogue seems to go beyond notions of student engagement as mere attendance at participation in classes or feedback on classroom activities. Instead, what it gestures at is perhaps more current ideas of student representation and co-creation in the curriculum as conceptualized by Boville et al. That you can see on the second quote on this slide as a space in between student engagement and participation, where the collaboration between students and staff is much more meaningful, and students are much more active in constructing and contributing to the learning process. In this sense, the rigidity of the central human figure from our first art technique that our participant identified is potentially quite dogmatic or monologic presence seems to actually act as a useful point of departure for maybe a more dynamic and polyvocal learning process. At the same time, as can be seen in the interview extracts on previous slide, but also on this one, collaborative practices associated with creativity and student co-creation were discussed by our participant as process rather than product, thus echoing earlier and perhaps ongoing discussions around the value of process-oriented pedagogies in English language teaching and beyond by the likes of Elbow and Littlewood, among others. Just like the collaboration with students as a process of noticing, or in the words of our participant, how they're behaving in every moment of the lesson, unquote, our participant also represented the process of collaboration as a constant work in progress, constructing and deleting shapes, revising labels and meanings, considering the space and context surrounding their image, and so on. And it is obvious from the narration on the left-hand side that they sought a fusion of shapes, perspectives, voices, and even colors and fonts. This sort of quest for polyphony was also accompanied with an awareness of the shifting and even fraught nature of meaning making. At one point, which I haven't mentioned including this slide, but our participants expressed concern about the potentially offensive or perhaps culturally sensitive connotations of a triangular shape on their own, which in their view justify the decision to replace the common triangle for everyone with the slogan Tea for all, and to place a square in the middle of the triangle. Moreover, this recognition of the significance of context and audience was reiterated thereafter in our participants' attention to the composition and use of blank space in their image, and in their final comment on this slide about collaboration as empowering practitioners in a range of contexts. In this sense, collaboration emerged in the pilot dataset as a practice that is historically, socially, and politically contingent and does not seem to be unfolding in power-free zone, as Louise Phillips and Xenia Napon have argued. While the dialogic nature of creative teaching practice as collaboration with learners promises a more democratic process of knowledge production and communication, this somewhat romantic impulse seems to be co-opted by the current neoliberal climate in higher education institutions, um, which frames the exercise of personal freedom and a fulfilling of individual potential as the logical outcome of the unfettered operation of free market forces, as Ding and Bruce have eloquently argued. In this framework, higher education institutions, and by extension their staff and students, are competing in a global knowledge economy, and teaching and learning are reduced to the status of commodities, and educational outcomes are measured within an audit culture that serves to justify learners' investment in education and the institution's financial investment in staff. So this tension between, on the one hand, the democratic potential of dialogic collaboration, and on the other hand, the neoliberal push for competition, was reflected in our participants' comment on this slide, which refers to one of the survey paintings about the use of creative techniques during the COVID pandemic. To them, the competitive nature of performance-oriented culture in the neoliberal higher education institution is not conducive to collaboration or creative pedagogy, for that matter. As you can see in the quote, the pressures of competition, including the exclusiveness of the reward structure, and conversely the potential severity of punitive attitudes towards unsuccessful risk-taking, is likely to stifle any collaborative or creative impulses. Our participants clearly identified the need to clear a metaphorical space in the image, which you can see on the right-hand side, for more student agency, motivation, risk-taking, and collaboration. Their response reinforces views of knowledge as socially constructed, as Hyland has argued, and as a collaborative endeavour of a community of practice, as per Lev and Wenger, rather than the product of an individual effort. At the same time, however, the constraints and perils of the neoliberal landscape cannot be easily ignored.
Right. The other theme that emerged from our participants' interview was practitioners' agency and identity, which has been reflected on so far, but hasn't been explained explicitly. In response to their understanding of creativity in the context of EAP and explaining their interpretation of the image that you can see on this slide, our participants reflected on two distinct sides of their professional identity. They drew a contrast between Eastern Asian and Western educational systems. And by Western educational systems, I mean UK educational systems. And these are the two educational systems that our participant had taught in. So the contrast that they made is presumably influenced by political, cultural, and social factors, as mentioned by Truman. So they've reflected on the institutional view of EAP, which is explained by Alex Ding and Ian Bruce in details. This continuous interaction between their individual and socio-cultural environment seems to have been developing their personal and professional identity. And it is evident in their first narration, where they see they see the teaching material, the teaching methods, and the research methods that are used in Eastern Asian context inside the bigger square. And as you can see in the second narration, they call it a jail. So they see these in a jail, but then they mention that it is totally different in the participants' words. it is totally different in the Western or in the UK educational system. So the participants' transition of identity from being a support service provider to an academic practitioner who can be more than a language technician, um, despite despite mentioning the ongoing gap in professional recognition from the institution. As you can see, they are in the second narration, they say not still changing, and they are using the verb I can see my, sorry, they say I can see my EAP teaching context material are coming out of this bigger square. So they don't see it there yet, but we can see the transition of identity or professional identity and agency here. All this indicates their ability for intellectual engagement and creative pedagogical approaches, conceptualizing new roles and responsibilities for themselves. Followed by their collective knowledge building view and their perception of EAP as an academic field in which the practitioner has, in the participants' words, got every reason and every right to grow up academically in EAP teaching. However, the participants' repeated allusion to academic field view of EAP, perceiving practitioners as transformative intellectuals, can provide the grounds for incorporation of change and innovation and creativity within the profession through individual and collective initiatives instead of over-relying on institutionalized prescriptive educational and performance standards, and looking for, as was mentioned before, democratic process of knowledge production and communication, as well as collaboration.
Such collaboration and co-creation went even further, alluding that for our participant, creativity was a means of seeing higher education language pedagogy more broadly. So it appeared as a paradigm which was situated in this space with the student rather than a mere tool of learning, when our participant said, I can't do anything without my student. So this unity with the students through collaboration can be seen as what Bahapa called the third space. This view of creativity as being an integral part of language education, or the very essence of language teaching, are not new in language education. However, in EAP specifically, they seem kind of peripheral or mute. The third space in our study seemed to promote a certain sense of equality through this collaboration in the learning and teaching process with the student. When our participant said, for example, in this sense, I'm shaping up the lesson that is also shaped by my student. So this generated what Koestler called the law of unfolding of creative practice, which resides in the unity with the student. This altogether moves creativity beyond being seen by our participant, for example, as a personal professional attribute, as was found in a Coffey and Lung's study. So creative practice thus seen encompassing more common features of creative acts. For example, well-known four steps, well-known stages of Wallace's creative process, and three aspects of creative acts devised by Kaufman and Sternberg, including, for example, novelty, quality, and relevance.
So referring back to our main research question, which was how do EAP practitioners express and facilitate creative voices in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. Following analyzing our pilot study data, we observed that our participants interpreted creativity as a collective or collaborative process rather than product, in which they consider themselves as transformative intellectuals with individual and collective initiatives who can conceptualize new roles and responsibilities for themselves. For our participants, these all seem to be achieved through multiplicity of voices, co-creation, third space, co-construction aligned with students' learning process in a power-free zone. And all these findings bring together the conceptual and theoretical framework of our study and have posed questions for our ongoing main study. So the next 3 slides are the sources that we use to inform our project. Thank you for watching, and we would welcome your questions, comments, and thoughts.